Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Colma. I'm the head of programs and communications here at International House, and we're happy to welcome you here tonight for a conversation on Professor Newman's book, Unmaking Waste. For those of you who might not know International House has been around for 91 years, and for those 91 years, we've been bringing international students and scholars together to build friendships, relationships, and to cross-cultural understanding. And we do that in a number of different ways. Largely through some of the programming that we do, like tonight's, which is part of, for us, our Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series programming. We also do programming specifically related to graduate students here at the University of Chicago. So if you like tonight's program, and I'm sure you're going to, please come back and visit us again. We are delighted tonight to be working together with longstanding partners of International House, with CISR, together as well with the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Committee on Environment, Geography, and Urbanization. We want to thank, of course, Professor Newman and the other speakers for joining us here today. We want to thank those partners. I also want to thank our staff who's floating around in various different places here for helping us out with everything tonight. And with that said, and to get the program started and to make further introductions, I want to turn the microphone over to Professor Claudia Brittingham. Professor Brittingham, thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Claudia Brittingham. I'm a professor of ancient American art history here at the University of Chicago. And I have to say that book celebrations are my favorite kind of events. There are so many times on campus where we work so hard together to refine ideas and to polish them and to challenge them. And now we can just stop for a moment and breathe and celebrate what a fabulous achievement Unmaking Waste is. So our order of occasion today, I'm going to begin by introducing everybody, and then we will have commentaries by Pauline Goul, Mariana Cabral, and then we're going to give away a book, just because it might be too boring if we all kept talking. And then after we give away a book, I'll say a thing or two, and then after that, Sarah will respond, we'll have time for questions, and hopefully we will all end in enough time for Pauline to go run off to a fire drill somewhere else at 6:30 on the nose. But in the meantime, let me just begin by, my charge has been to introduce this book in 3 minutes or less, and then I will introduce our speakers also in 3 minutes or less, but I'll begin by introducing Sarah Newman, who is, I suspect you all know her, but so I'll be fast, an anthropological archaeologist whose research combines archaeological, historical, and art historical methods and evidence to explore anthropological and environmental issues, including histories of waste and reuse, long-term landscape transformations, and human-animal relations. She focuses primarily on Mesoamerica, but her curiosity extends far beyond there, as we will see in her next book, no pressure, Animal Archaeology, Traces of Non-Human Histories, which adapts questions and approaches that archaeologists have used to study remote human history and extends them to deep animal histories as well. But today we are here to celebrate Unmaking Waste, New Histories of Old Things, published this year by the University of Chicago Press, a book that explores ideas about what waste is and what should be done with it, and how they are informed by specific historical and cultural contexts. And although I could read the blurb on the website, in fact I was given dispensation to do so, I think the best way to give a sense of the accomplishment of this book is actually just to tell you about each one of its chapters in 1 sentence or less. So we begin in an introduction with Italo Calvino, suggesting a wide-ranging literary imagination. And then in chapter 1, Throwaway Living, think about the dominant concept of waste and its evolution over the course of the modern period, in which Sarah shows us that waste is not a static and given thing, but in fact something quite culturally contingent that has evolved even within Euro-American society over the past few centuries. We then move in chapter 2 to archaeologies of garbage, thinking about the ways that things that are discarded have been put to use by various different schools of archaeology over the course of the discipline's history. and then continue moving back in time in chapter 3 called Cleanliness and Godliness to examine the clash of ideologies about waste in the wake of the Spanish invasion, contrasting Nahuatl ideas about tlazoli or Yucatec ta with European ideas of sin, waste, and corruption. Chapter 4, Dirty Work, dives deep into a series of conflicts over waste management and their intersections with colonial rule. Chapter 5, The Things Left Behind, considers Maya deposits in the first millennium CE, and as well as concepts such as ta that are developed in hieroglyphic texts and that we can see through archaeological sources. Chapter 6, Anamorphic Archaeology, articulates a new way of understanding the relationship between the archaeological remains that we see, the theories through which we interpret and describe them, and a representation that is thus generated of the ancient past. And in the process, Sarah also demonstrates her absolute prowess as a field archaeologist in her analysis of a deposit made at the site of El Zotz in the Maya world around 830 CE. The conclusion returns us to the contemporary world, asking us to broaden our imagination of waste, now that we have seen in this journey across time and space what a historically and culturally contingent understanding we all have. It's really a remarkable accomplishment that I'm so delighted to be able to celebrate with all of you today. And joining me in that celebration, I have two wonderful colleagues. First, Pauline Goul, who is assistant professor of French literature in the college here at the University of Chicago. She's a scholar of early modern French literature and environmental criticism, who focuses on the many ways early modern texts represent already concerns about sustainability and the increasing weight being put on the environment by human appetites. She's currently at work on a book called Ecologies of Waste, Literature and Sustainability in Renaissance France, about the influence of the New World in the ways French authors conceived of their growing footprint, despite France's lack of involvement in colonization at the time. And she's also at work on a second book project about early modern ecofeminism, investigating the structural links between women and the environment in Renaissance and 17th century France. We'll be followed then by Mariana Petri Cabral, a Brazilian archaeologist who is adjunct professor at the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology at the, I do not speak Portuguese, Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, in Brazil, working in the graduate program in anthropology, the program in the built environment and sustainable heritage, and as a researcher at the Natural History Museum and Botanical Gardens. Her work focuses on indigenous knowledge and modes of comparison between scientific and indigenous ways of knowing. Drawing from extensive work with indigenous archaeologies, her research and writing aim to develop critical insights into the epistemological and ontological nature of archaeology, seeking to valorize indigenous concepts and practices as strong tools to construct and manage narratives about past times. And I'm the Mesoamerican archaeologist. I did not write out an introduction for myself. I studied the art of ancient Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and Belize, mostly before the Spanish invasion. My most recent book has to do with the visibility of things that we now want to call sculpture. And my next project thinks about the interconnectedness of the Mesoamerican world and how different it is from the modern model of the nation state. But I also wanted to say, if you are so impressed by the brilliance of Mariana's comments today, as I am sure you will be, she and Sarah are going to have a conversation tomorrow at 12:30 in Saye Hall, entitled Archaeology and the Future of Indigenous Histories in the Amazon. And so you won't want to miss that event. But at the moment, moving on as swiftly as possible with this event, Pauline, it's your turn.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm really happy to be here. I'm sure from this introduction you can tell why I was asked to do this. When I arrived here a year ago, Neil, I think, told me I really should meet Sarah Newman. And so we're the waste people, I guess. And it's really nice to be here for this celebration. I think there's a line in the, I believe, conclusion of the book. I don't want to spoil anything. This is a very strange exercise because you don't want to spoil the book, but you also want people to pick it up. And Sarah says that waste has become a disenchantment story. I think actually the book is a re-enchantment story. So I'll try to explain why I think that. There's this quote in a chapter from Doña Sabina, who's a Quiche Maya daykeeper. She's explaining the offerings of, eggs, candles, broken pots, and Coca-Cola that she adds to the fire. And she says, "El regalo tiene que ser transformado," so the gift has to be transformed. If the book was a gift, then this is the transformation. And I do mean that this is what this book event is today, because we as speakers may, transfer or break up what the author meant to say. This is nothing new. I'm not teaching you this. We may add a whole collection of things, random things, and attachment to what Sarah wrote, and so I apologize for that. There were things that I was expecting in the book, given its title and its topic, but I think I'll focus on things that surprised me instead. So the reason I focused on this quote to start with is because the book is actually full of beautiful and varied quotations that come from archaeologists, anthropologists, 16th century Spanish missionaries, Borges, Calvino. And I'll read a few just so that you can hear what I mean, and I hope that's not spoiling the book. The first quote is from William Raggi, the inventor of garbology. The first waste flake knocked off the napping of the first stone tool. And I thought that was so evocative of really what the unmaking of waste that is needed is doing. The other quote is, "Under capitalism, it is impossible to create an interest in production that is not also an interest in decay and destruction." This is from Sidney and Beatrice Webb. And then there are these two quotes from the Popol Vuh. "However many things they had, all of them crushed their faces." And the other one, "We shall grind you like maize." And finally, the last one is from Fray Domingo de Vicos and his version of the story of Abel and Cain that's meant to convert the indigenous people. "Never will there be entangledness." Well, there is entangledness, I think, in the book. So my first point is perhaps about waste studies, which is really how I approached it, or how I was meant to approach it. Of course, the book cites and engages with all what I would call the usual suspects. And in fact, if you're teaching, any sort of graduate seminar or class, I really suggest chapter 1 as, an introduction to waste studies, in fact. But unlike all of these usual suspects, I would say, the book doesn't really yield to too much of a contemporary focus or Eurocentric or Western-centric focus, which was always my problem in reading these works. And more importantly, I think it troubles the inherited vocabularies that scholars of waste in general, despite doing very compelling work, obviously, seem to take for granted. And in this vein, the book challenges us to dispose of the very notion of waste. So that's the kind of unmaking. And perhaps what it says is that the notion itself has already become too fossilized in the way that we think about it. So as a waste scholar, and in fact, I think as an anything scholar, what I think we're always seeking to do is, or we're seeking the waste book, or the book on our topic, right? The one that will say everything and redefine the field. Or we're also seeking to write that book, maybe. And the previous books, in my opinion, were insufficient, simultaneously too broad or too narrow in scope. And chapter 1 is an example of what Sarah is trying to do that's a bit different. And again, I don't want to say too much. This unmakes waste in these ways, which is by both demonstrating the notion, or that the notion in its uses and in its representations is insufficient and historically shallow, and also asserting its power and dynamism, in fact, as a reorientating theoretical tool, or mechanism, if you wish. And in fact, it is a perfect illustration of my other point, which is that there's also, of course, an eco-critical endeavor in the book. I don't know if you meant it with that word, or rather environmental criticism, if you wish. And even a post-humanist take, I think. I can give you some pages that I think are truly about post-humanism. In the many parts that are about, in fact, entanglements. And that complicates, in fact, that famous definition that we know as waste scholars and that some of you might know as anthropologists, by Mary Douglas of, dirt is matter out of place. The archaeological proofs of the world's permeability Or to quote Sarah, and I'm quoting here, objects and the deliberate ways that they were discarded tied things to people, unquote. And so this book is most interesting, not only for its theoretical framework, that is to say its quotations, but also for the way that it compels us to rephrase and to reorient these quotes that we know. So another question I would have that is maybe more for discussion is what this book does to, for instance, Jane Bennett's Vibrant Matter, which was another Bible, I would say, of the last decade. My other point is going to be about imperfect metaphors, and maybe what I'm trying to do here is force this book as a literature criticism or a literary criticism work. I don't know if it was meant that way. I took it that way. So there's a lot in it, as Claudia said, about indigenous concepts and semantics, and also about inherited vocabularies of modernity and of colonial time. But there's also a surprising amount about the concept of metaphorical potential for a book that is book-ended. So I just spoiled the ending, but Claudia already said it for the beginning, by Calvino's parable of Leonia, which is the city where everything gets used only once and everything is disposable. One question that Sarah asks is whether, in fact, parables are too simplistic, which I think is a very interesting, pointed question for literature. So what happens when a form of waste is a tangible thing in an original Nahuatl text? And what does it do to the boundary between the literal and the symbolic or the metaphorical? Why do we think, in fact, that Calvino's parable is too simplistic or too obvious, maybe? Perhaps it is implied that we think too literally about waste, which also means too simplistically. So in the conclusion, again, spoiling the conclusion, we're asked to wonder what it would mean to think of recycling as yet another metaphor that's kind of outdated already. Some chapters, in fact, are theoretical challenges to the discipline of, or the etymologies also, of archaeology. Of course, I won't speak about that, I'm not a specialist, but the others are interventions in the field of what you would call colonial studies or early modern studies. I can also speak about that. And it's showing how indigenous labor, people, spaces were made responsible and blamed for waste. If I had to schematically synthesize it, I would say that those chapters demonstrate how, despite not necessarily having thought carefully about waste, disposal and management, in Europe, the act of colonizing itself and the New World led Spaniards to the invention of waste, by which I mean the same concept that we use in modernity and in the Euro-American experience, the concept that, in fact, this book invites us to dispose of. And I think one question that leaves us with, that is a very important question for early modern studies or colonial studies in general, is why did this happen there and then? And we can discuss it. This is where I get a bit more literary, but I do care about this. In some pages, I was immediately called back to a significant work of literary criticism that, in my own work, I try to reclaim as an environmental, as being environmental before its time, which is Michael Bakhtin's Rabelais' World. Maybe you don't know about it, but I'll explain. It has something to do with the regenerative potential of waste, the notions of renewal and death, purification and pollution, etc. So if Bakhtin conceived all of this about a quintessentially Western, early modern, very popular work of fiction, which is the work of Rabelais, I wonder what it means to have such echoes of this concept in traditional ecological knowledge or Pan-American mythology. Clearly what it shows is that this century, the 16th century, the 17th even, is a hinge, no matter how we want to resist those categories and those differences. Why, in fact, I think that's a question the book asks, why did we forget about the ambivalence that's inherent to the mundane life of people and of their objects and environment? And my last point is about affect. Without spoiling the conclusion, again, several moments in the book engage the arguments in really a foundation of affectivity or affect studies, affect theory, if you wish, that also implies thinking about care and caretaking. So really the ethics of care, Carol Gilligan, at least the way I read it. And since the book does have those eco-critical foundations and at least potential, I don't want to say foundations maybe, I think it also declares that we may be frozen in some harmful and unproductive commonplaces or common sense representations that really prevent us from seeing the possibilities of more complex and ambivalent affects. So there's a part in the conclusion about Ursula Le Guin. And I think at some point also Sarah writes that there's something that can be both comforting and terrifying in the end of objects, while Le Guin says that the tragic can also be reassuring. I think we should think more about what that means in terms of how we approach climate change. And in general, just to conclude, the book puts words on the limits of a modern and Western framework to think about waste. And the words that is putting on it are hieroglyphs. And they contain steaming lumps of excrement. And that's it for the, what is it called? Not the opposite of a spoiler, a preview, if you will.
Just go?
I think so. Yeah, Mariana, you're up.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I'm very grateful for the invitation that Sarah made, and very glad to talk about the book. It was very exciting. I was telling Sarah just a few hours ago how preparing this talk today made me make even more relations with the book. So this is a very exciting book and I speak as an archaeologist, but I think we can make connections to many different things. So for the start, I think there is a very unusual approach to trash, the way that Sarah frameworks the whole book. So it's not a guide for waste management practice, and she tells us about a whole history of waste management practices, but it's not like a guide for that. And it's not an empty critic to our behavior today as trash makers. So it's not just like a critic of how we think about trash, it's more than that. And there's the historical approach to that, to think of how we build this category of trash and how we deal with that, and how we create our ideas about trash. And I think there is a very important part of the book, the whole interest in thinking about the idea of trash, how trash is not just the object or what we throw away, but it's this very important idea, what we think about trash. But I think the most important thing about the book is that the book is a call to awareness, so that we can be more aware of the way we deal with trash, so the way our society is dealing with trash. The constraints of our ideas, how our ideas limit the way we think about trash and we think about other periods of time and trash, how they limit our imagination of the past, and I think that's a very important part for archaeology, a very important contribution to us, and but also how, in the end, these ideas, they block our imaginations for the future, not just for the past, but what we can see next. So, and I think it's not by chance that Sarah is using so many literary quotes here. And even the quote by Italo Calvino's The Leonia city, the city that was destroyed by its own trash. It's part of this lack of imagination in a way of the future. All we can see is the city destroyed by the trash. Or even another quote that, another story that Sarah brings, the holders that we have in our society and how we treat them as a problem of under-disposing and not of overconsumption. So this is part of our limitations of our ideas about trash. So as an archaeologist, I really think this is a book of archaeology, but I think it's more than that. And in a sense, I think it's also some kind of reverse anthropology book. looking to ourselves. So it's looking to some archaeological matters, and there is this part about some archaeological work with archaeological material from an ancient site, but there is also this look to our society, so a kind of like reverse anthropology looking at us and trying to understand our concepts, the way we behave as society. And also, as she does that, she puts in evidence a lot of our contradictions and even our failures on our ideas about trash and our ideas as society also. In a way, it's a very anthropological approach to waste, and as an archaeologist, I connect with anthropology very much. I think this is a really important way of doing archaeology. And I really praise that because I think Sarah builds on an archaeology, and here I'm quoting, an archaeology that expands from a methodology to uncover the past towards a materially ground anthropological approach to long-term and changing ways of understanding the worlds people create and inhabit, end of quote. And I think that's a very important way of framing archaeology. I think it brings an opening to our imagination. I think that archaeology can help us imagine the worlds that other people have created and inhabit, and it puts the existence of other old worlds even possible. And it connects in this way with my experience working with indigenous people in Brazil, and how like they also have these different worlds where they live and they build. So I think it connects to this concept of pluriverse that Marisol de la Cadena and Mario Blazer propose in one of their books. And well, I would like I picked like three main themes that for me were very interesting as I read Sarah's book. So instead of going through chapters, I try to frame my talk on these three themes. One is pretty obvious, waste itself, like it's on the cover of the book, but it's all over the book. And it made me also think again of archaeology as the discipline of waste. I remember thinking about that when I was an undergrad, and then I kind of lost this on the way, and then the book made me look back to this connection of archaeology and waste again. But Sarah thinks of waste not as an object, but also as a concept, as I said before. So I think this is a very interesting change on the way of looking to waste, because it makes us go away from a mundane perspective or thinking about waste as some mundane matter, but think about it and thinking through it. So I understand that this is an important contribution of archaeology also to present matters that is not just about the past. So I think this way of the way she builds the book, thinking about waste and bringing from the contemporary to the ancient times, helps to make archaeology also more relevant for the contemporary times. Another theme that for me was very exciting as an archaeologist is the way she connects the history of waste management practice to the history of archaeology. How like our theories in archaeology, they evolve like in parallel to the ways that we manage waste in our society. And of course, this is something that other archaeologists have showed, this connection of how our social environment builds into our theories, but I think it's, she brings something extra on that. At some point, she makes this reference to the symmetrical archaeologist, and they used to say that things are us, and Sarah did not write that, but I think what she's saying in a way is that actually we are our waste. Like it's not just that the waste are us, but like we are also this same waste. We are part of this thing as ideas and as matters also. So the way we think our ideas, they mirror the way that we act, and how we act drives our thoughts. So archaeology as this discipline of waste becomes very evident in the book, and I think in a very, very important way. And I think this is a very good chapter for undergrads understand the theoretical, like the history of archaeological thought in a very engaging way. So the book makes me wonder about this connection between the way that we as society manage waste and the development of the field such archaeology. Why do we have a field such archaeology in our society? And I guess one of the reasons is because waste is something really important to us. It's something really central to us. So I started to think that maybe archaeology, we could see archaeology as another waste management practice, like picking these things also that were waste for somebody else and getting them again circulating. It's part of it's another way of managing this waste too. Or maybe, and this is kind of the opposite question in a way, do we see waste everywhere in such a way that because of that, that is what we know? Like in the case that if we see waste everywhere, is that the reason why we also think of archaeology as a waste management practice? Or could archaeology be something else? And I don't think there's an answer for that, but I think these are very interesting ideas to think about where is archaeology and what we can do with this discipline. And the third theme for me that's really catching about the book is this proposition of an archaeological approach in a way, which is the anamorphic archaeology. Pauline has already told us about this connection about interpretation, the material traces, and the theories that we use to build that. And I think what it's really interesting the way that Sarah builds this proposition, because she's not just proposing at theoretical level, but she's like doing it, experimenting this proposition with archaeological material and studies. So, and she shows us in a very important way how our concepts become also scientific objects. So this is something important, specifically in the case where she's studying this assemblage at El Zotz in Guatemala, where is this concept of problematic deposits, which like, I'm not familiar with this literature. As I read that, I already thought it was problematic as a concept for archaeology, but Sarah shows how it became even more problematic because something that was supposed to be a label for exactly what it says, a problematic interpretation of some deposition, became actually an object itself, like it became a thing in Mesoamerican studies. So as she does that, she shows us like how we do that with some kind of easiness in archaeology, and I guess we do that in all the science. Like our concepts, they become objects in themselves, and we kind of lose track of where they come from. And I think here there's a very interesting, situation where we can think of these things that we cannot explain, like problematic deposits, as an excess, which is also another concept from Marisol de la Cadena, which she uses exactly to fit these things that do not fit into our own categories as scientists. So she's working with indigenous people in South America, and she uses the idea of an excess to create grounds for us to think about what to do with these things that do not fit into our disciplines. And the way Sarah is experimenting this new archaeological approach, the anamorphic archaeology, she exposes this excess. She shows us how this excess is there. Like, it's not just the concept, but it's not working, but how this concept can be used back. How can we work with this excess and bring this excess to archaeology again and not keep it out. Like when we label something as a problematic deposit or unknown things or unexplained things, we keep them out of our explanations. And Sarah's work, Sarah's exercise here is to bring these things that did not fit before back to archaeology, back to explanation. So on this particular chapter, she shows a very careful study of the assemblages, and she goes to something that I really enjoy about archaeology, that is following what the objects are telling us. So she really goes detail in these objects and go after what are the stories behind them, what she calls a biography of these objects. So this allows her to see other ways of explaining these deposits, this one problematic deposit in different ways. And she shows how it's very important to think not of the end result, like the things as we found them through archaeology, but the process that build them. So if we can map this process, this can help us to understand better the context in itself and what was going on there. And for me, it was quite exciting that as she did that and was studying these objects, she brings back some concepts that she brought from Mesoamerica in the earlier chapters, like the sweeping, the burning, and the breaking as part of process of waste management, but in this critical way that perhaps these are not waste. So she connects the Mesoamerican ideas into the archaeological analysis in a very interesting way. And then new histories emerge, and new histories in the title of the book. So you see these new histories appearing because of this different approach to the archaeological assemblage. So she shows that assemblages are not just deposits, and they actually became part of the building. So it's not just the people putting things there, like discarding things or offering things. Those things, they become part of the building. So she actually shows us how this idea of waste does not belong to this context, but also how this idea of problematic deposit does not, as obvious as it may sound, does not help us understand the context. So she finds a way through that to show us these other interpretations. So the assemblages are not just an act of finishing or ending, like, well, we put the assemblages there and then it's done, or something that belongs to the past. But they are also serving to renew or to begin new cycles. And she's saying that based on the Mesoamerican studies about this process, this ritual process that people would enact. So she shows how this assemblage actually is connecting both the past and the future. So this is really interesting from the archaeological point of view, because it makes us see how we can connect with other temporalities through the material world and through the material collections. And they also connect different people and places. So she's like from one context, very well analyzed, very well studied. She's able to connect us to different temporalities, to different people, to different places. So it transformed this problematic deposit in a very rich context. And then going to my final remarks, as I can say, there are some very interesting things that I connect very directly, that this idea that objects and things are never finished, and that's something that she concludes because of the study of this specific deposit, in a way that when they are on the ground and when they were put there, that was not the end. And as we do our work as archaeologists and we pick these things back, we keep in a cycle of existence of these things. But they are not, and they do not end at the archaeological record, but they do not to end also as they become archaeological objects, or they go to our assemblages or to our museums. Things keep going, as Shara writes. So this idea that objects are not dead and they're not like static, I think that's a very powerful idea in archaeology. I think changes the way we relate to objects, opens possibilities of thinking of archaeology in a much more rich and complex way. And it connects also to some indigenous ideas about archaeological sites. The people that I work with and other indigenous people in the Amazon, they are very specific about not calling sites, archaeological sites, as abandoned villages. Because they say these places were never abandoned in the way that they never end, as we say in archaeology. For us, it's kind of obvious that an archaeological site was abandoned at some time, but for us, for them, this idea of abandonment does not make sense. And there's a very recent article at the Sapiens magazine by two North American indigenous archaeologists, Nicolas Laluc and Jose Aguilar, and they saying the same thing, like we should like stop using the word abandonment to talk about archaeological sites. And I think this really connects to this idea that things do not end, they not finish, they keep going. Mm-hmm. And I think this also connects to probably the last phrase that Sarah wrote in the book on the acknowledgements. As she mentioned the loss of her father. I'm sorry for that. And she concludes that there is no unmaking. The unmaking, it's something that it's much more in our heads than on the existence of things. Things are always keep on going. And as we lose someone, these people also, they continue to exist in a way. And I think the way indigenous people deal with this kind of grief perhaps might be more effective, more helping to us also, exactly because things do not end and people do not end also, and like we cannot unmake this process, but the whole idea of unmaking materiality is something that loses sense as we think about this continuity. And I'm just finishing, sorry. So just to really end that, I just want to make a point on this literature use of the work. And you use one author that I really like, the Argentinian Jorge Luis Borges. And I think there's another piece of him, the Aleph, would really be very powerful to think with this archaeology, which is this sphere that you look and you can see everything at once, and some kind of archaeology too. I'm sorry, Claudia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments, Mariana. Now we get to do something fun, which is that we get to give somebody a book, and Alexis is going to come here with the book and with a name for me. It's a number. The number is number 563015. So if you happen to have a ticket that says 563015, congratulations. This is your book. Wonderful. Okay, so it is now my responsibility to add on to all of the other comments that have already been made about this book. And I will do so briefly so that we can hear from Sarah, which is what we've all been waiting to do. And I want to appreciate what a wonderfully ambitious book this is. That many books in my field, the archaeologists in my field don't always write books to begin with, so that's a wonderful thing. But that many books might choose to focus on a particular time or a particular place. And what really distinguishes this book is its, globe-spanning ambition, if I may. And one of that it brings together a summary of changing Euro-American conceptions about waste, a nuanced reflection on the roles that ideas about disposal have played in archaeology, careful reading of Spanish and Nahua and hieroglyphic Mayan sources, a real attention to the materiality of archaeological deposits, and a new kind of theoretical framework for thinking all of this together. You know, any one or two of those would be a major accomplishment for a book. To find them all together is just really nothing short of astounding. But there's one thing that I've alluded to already, and I just want to pause to appreciate for a moment, and that's the structure of this book. The way that it moves backwards in time, from things that we think are familiar to things that are, but have progressively become less familiar, to a more distant time and place. And of course, if you think about books that you might deal with the archaeological past, this is a really unusual way of structuring things. It's much more common to go, however much one wants to resist it, in chronological order from the earliest to the latest things. But by doing this, the way that Sarah has structured this in this book, she demonstrates how we cannot really know the past except through its accretions into the present. The ways that every idea that we have, whatever history they have, shapes the way that we understand the past as we encounter it. And so to make that point through the very structure of the book feels to me to be one of those interventions that works upon you without you perhaps understanding exactly the way that it is working. The other thing that I really appreciate about this book as an ancient Americanist is the way that it subjects both an ancient American past, the early modern moment in which we come to understand that past, and in which, you know, the hierarchies that still continue to shape our understanding are put into place. And then it gives equal attention and a kind of equally careful and respectful attention to modern Euro-American conceptions. And so to see these things on an equal footing, that both have the capacity perhaps to explain each other, rather than this being a unidirectional process of interpretation. This feels to me, once again, like a real conceptual accomplishment that, like so many things in this book, we hear about the way that waste itself has the capacity to be a generative concept. And it strikes me that this is both a really generative and a very generous book that opens up new ways of thinking about and understanding and narrating histories of all kinds of things. So congratulations, Sarah. Well done.
My foot's asleep from sitting there. I thought I was going to fall over. I'm just going to say a couple quick things. Yeah, because I don't really want, I think what I had to say is kind of in the book. But somebody told me, somebody in my department told me like that, you know, when you write a book, it really hits you when you like get a big stack of books and you stick it on your desk and you just see like this column of your own book. And it's really nice to see those columns of my own book. But I would say that actually what's really great is, you know, to hear three really incredible people whose work I really admire, kind of read and digest the book, and then to kind of hear back from them the things that were surprising to them or interesting. And I think if I had to say, you know, that if there were three audiences that I wanted to kind of address with the book, it would be the Mesoamericanist, the people interested in discard studies, and the anthropological archaeologist. So success. So I think hearing the three of you talk has given me a lot to think about, and I think it's really good because, you know, you sort of finish the book and I think, how could I ever think about this again? So it's nice to hear from you and then think a little bit about those, about these ideas again. And yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say. I just want to thank everyone for coming, and yeah, thank you. Sorry, we're gonna have Q&A.
Yes, you are not off the hook.
Sorry,
yet, Sarah.
great.
You have heard from us, and now it's time to hear from you. If anybody has questions, please raise your hand. I think there will be a microphone provided unto you. Yes, there will. And we would love to hear questions, comments, reactions, both from those of you who have read the book already. I know there must be someone in this room who has read the book already, and those of you who might aspire to do so in the future. Anyone? Okay. Wait, was that a hand, Katie? Okay, go for it.
Hello. Congratulations, Sarah. I am really excited to read the book. I haven't yet, but something that came up, I think Pauline mentioned this, and that I've been thinking about, and I was just curious how your book engages with it or not, is the concept of sustainability. Archaeologies of asking about how people cared about the future, short-term, long-term expectations or anticipations of that. I've been struggling with this because in many ways it's a problematic neoliberal concept that we're sort of like superimposing on the past. So I was just curious if you could say something about the concept, do you engage with it, and how you do that?
Yeah, thanks. So I don't actually talk much about sustainability in the book, especially not kind of in that term, or with that term. But I think that one of the things that I'm trying to show with you, kind of using the Mesoamerican examples, as Claudia said, the book kind of works back towards these examples so that they become kind of the foundation rather than the other way around, rather than sort of taking our contemporary perspectives as the given. It kind of works the other way. And so one of the things that I'm trying to show is that, we tend to think of these concepts like sustainability or about reuse or about recycling and things like that. And that I think that a lot of those concepts kind of depend on having a certain kind of antithesis to the concept, right? So things like reuse. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Actually, Pauline mentioned the Rathi quote about the flakes of stone, and it's like we talk about stone flakes, and then the next step is a reused stone flake, right? But it's kind of a new object or a new thing, rather than sort of thinking about the thing as having one purpose, and now you're just reusing it for others. And so one of the things that I kind of discuss is the fact that increasingly all these things are kind of made to have just a singular function, that we have all this incredible material, plastics and things like that, and it gets more and more and more specific so that you can't really reuse French fry containers or orange juice cartons, or they're so made for a single purpose. And so I think, anyway, I don't talk about it in terms of sustainability, but I think the point is to say that part of the problem is to imagine that is to sort of take for granted that these things exist, that things have an end, that trash is a problem, that if we think about these things, and even just sort of thinking about the, garbage as a crisis and stuff like that, it kind of forces us to stay within a certain kind of mindset. And I think that's what maybe Mariana was saying about kind of the constraints, how certain ways of thinking can kind of constrain both our ideas and actions. But yeah, it's kind of not necessarily intentionally not in terms of sustainability, but it's not in terms of sustainability. Thanks. Hi, Sarah.
So I guess my question is, I assigned the book in my undergrad class, and as I was teaching the book, I kept thinking okay, so there's gotta be a takeaway message here for people who are concerned with the Anthropocene. And there's no Anthropocene person here on stage.
Yeah.
And I'm also thinking archaeologists are constantly, kind of struggling with how to position ourselves in this kind of crisis, right? Whether to kind of take apart the term crisis itself, and how we can go about doing that. And I guess I'm kind of curious, after writing the book, right? like, do you have additional thoughts on that? And what I really like about the book is that it's also kind of unpacking the sort of universalisms, right? The garbage, sustainability. And I'm wondering, like, have you, like, after writing the book, do you think archaeologists have a way to kind of think about the universal subject in the, whether maybe to push back against the universal, kind of crisis, or whether we're here to all kind of become a subject that's, more attentive to saving the species, right? Or kind of a more earthly conscious, environmental conscious subject. And so I'm kind of curious to hear what you've, like, kind of after the book, whether you have any thoughts on, like, where we come at in this sort of, sort of Anthropocene moment, questions of crisis. Sorry, this is just kind of like Ken, like, what are your thoughts on a very fluid, kind of all over the place problem?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's kind of related to Katie's question about sustainability, and I think one thing that is, I think it's maybe a little problematic that archaeologists are maybe tending towards is to imagine that there are solutions to be found in the past for contemporary problems, right? To assume that sort of like garbage is a problem today, and it must have been a problem in the past, but maybe a more sustainable problem, and so we could look at the past to get some sort of idea about what to do in the future. And I think that one of the things that, a couple of people mentioned that I quote Ursula K. Le Guin, and one of the things I quote is she has this speech where she says, hard times are coming and what we're gonna need, she's talking about we're gonna need science fiction writers because people are gonna need larger realities, that the reality that we have is just too constrained to help us with the problems that are coming. And I think that that's kind of what archaeology could do, rather than saying there's specific examples to look at in the past, or to imagine that there's some kind of like, especially given that I'm talking about Mesoamerica and other indigenous peoples, to imagine that there's some sort of like ecological way of being in the past or in certain places, but to think that all that archaeology could really do is to show that there are very fundamentally different ways of as Mariana was saying, kind of creating and inhabiting different worlds. And I think that if we were able to kind of frame things less as kind of tying archaeology into contemporary crises, which kind of starts you off in a very narrow window of looking into the past, right? That what we could offer is to say, well, there's other ways to think about this than a crisis, and then maybe that kind of, offers a different way of thinking about present problems and present evidence and present materials rather than transposing it from the past.
Thank you, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks.
I have a question, two brief questions. One is, why did you pick up the concept waste? There are many synonyms like trash, garbage, or discard, etc. The other thing is kind of related to the previous two questions. From today's perspective, or from a sustainability perspective, the best trash is the one that disappears, so to say. So the objects that you often excavate are the most durable, kind of the survival of the strongest. And I was wondering if durability comes into play in your conceptions. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So as far as the terms go, so they have a little section in the introduction of the book where I kind of say there are a lot of words for trash, and one of the things that I'm kind of trying to show is that all of those terms have a certain amount of baggage to them, or a certain kind of specificity that maybe doesn't work so well when applied to the distant past or to a different place. And so I settled on waste mostly because it kind of, I think it works to encompass both material and bodily kind of excreta. That's sort of how I came to that, is that it could sort of, I think trash kind of has, a kind of more modern connotation to it, and also more kind of physical durability. And then, kind of waste for me sort of includes both kind of organic and inorganic things. And then to your second question, kind of about durability, I think that one of the things that that I talk about a lot in the book are sort of that there, of course, there are these ways in which things could be, again, not necessarily reused, but sort of that things have multiple lives, right, in the past, that whatever that is, organic or inorganic materials, that things could be kind of transformed constantly. And I think that we're, even with some of these kind of cradle to cradle ideas and sort of circular economy and stuff like that, that one of the things that depends on is to kind of still have these, capitalist cycles of production and consumption and disposal. So you have to kind of keep things moving. And so the disappearance is just kind of another way of keeping things moving. And one of the examples that I use kind of late in the book is of this thing called the Ocean Cleanup Project, which is this, I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's this kind of big plastic net that was supposed to be kind of set out into the Pacific garbage patch, and it would collect all of the plastic floating there, and then it could take it to be recycled. Anyway, and they set this thing free, and it got kind of caught up in the currents in the Pacific garbage patch, and then it was sort of like the Pacific garbage patch was just lots of small pieces of plastic and one really giant piece of plastic floating around kind of aimlessly. And I use that as an example to sort of say, we can't really kind of take the solutions that we imagine to this problem that kind of enable the problem and expect them to be a solution to the problem. So I think, of course, I think it would be better if, you wear your sneakers and they have seeds in the soles and you wear them down as you walk around and you plant flowers or whatever. But I think to think that the solution is just going to be a different form of the system that's creating the problems is probably misguided.
I'm interested in any artwork, such as science fiction, particular authors, films that you might recommend as complementary to your book. Perhaps they inspired you while you were writing it.
So I think, so I cite occasionally the Ursula K. Le Guin, and I think several people brought up the fact that kind of Borges and Calvino are sort of central. And those, that's not science fiction, but I think one of the things that kind of, Borges works really well because it's kind of, the themes are really relevant, right? It's about kind of, some of it's about archaeology and objects and things. But also, I think that one of the things he tends to do in a lot of his stories is to sort of take what we imagine to be a very kind of mundane or sort of self-evident idea and then take it to its extreme to show kind of how ridiculous that actually is. So, aside from the ones that I use in the book, he has, an example where people start making maps and they want to make them more and more and more precise so that they get to the point where it's a one-to-one map and they're just covering the world with a map the size of the world. And then you can go off into the desert and find little pieces of the map blowing around and stuff. And it's sort of, he's sort of poking fun at this idea that you can kind of find a way to replicate the world on paper, and then you could get more and more and more precise with this imagined version of the world that you've put on the paper. So anyway, I would say for me, Borges has been one of the kind of key authors that I've found useful for thinking about almost everything, but waste also, yeah.
Are there any other questions? Other panelists, did either one of you want to get in a last word? In that case, I think we should all thank Sarah and have a party.